He was a man of mad slaughter. He was so deranged that he didn't even spare his own father. However, he always believed he was a superhero. The man even called himself the Peacemaker. One day, Smith was trying to stop the Starfish plan when he inadvertently revealed his face to the enemy. Amanda had repeatedly emphasized that she must not expose herself. The bloody movement happened to witness this scene and opened fire immediately. Fortunately, Smith had been beaten up since childhood, so this minor injury was nothing to him. After examination, it turned out he only had a slight ligament strain. Then the doctor stated that his injury didn't require hospitalization. He just needed to rest at home. Smith had to go through the discharge process. Afterward, he prepared to go home. Smith hailed a taxi. The taxi quickly took him to his destination, but when he was about to pay, Smith realized he was in trouble when he checked his pockets, because he didn't bring a single cent. Fortunately, after some argument, the driver agreed to accept his helmet as payment. Smith just got home and was about to rest, when he turned and found a woman pointing a gun at him. Then several more people entered the house. The leader of the group was David, who was previously a bodyguard and Amanda's trusted confidant. Next were the short-haired woman Ada and Kevin, both of whom had directly served under Amanda. Helen arrived a bit late. Their purpose this time was to invite Smith to join them, to complete their latest mission, which was to stop the butterfly plan. Of course, they weren't interested in knowing Smith's answer, but if he refused to join, there were only two outcomes: either go to jail, or have a bomb implanted in his brain. Smith had to complete the mission with the team. Thus, he became a new member of the Suicide Squad. Smith took the code name Peacemaker for himself. The next day, Smith planned to go to his father's house to scavenge. He also took his pet eagle, which he had raised for many years.
My fault now you fucked up and went to prison.
That's not what I'm saying.
Then what are you saying?
Every time they met, it ended in arguments, but they were still father and son. It was not good for either of them to fall out, so they both ended up not speaking at all. At the dining table, Smith felt the atmosphere was too awkward. To lighten the mood for his father, Smith told him funny stories from the mission. He narrated with great enthusiasm. Smith said that Bloody Movement was actually afraid of mice. His father laughed heartily at this. Just when Smith thought they could finally get along, his father suddenly changed his expression. He called his son a coward for being hurt by someone afraid of mice. It turned out they were simply not suited for conversation. Perhaps his father realized he was being a downer. After dinner, he took Smith to the laboratory. Smith didn't want to spend another second with him. He quickly grabbed some helmets and left. These helmets had special abilities. Smith would come to get some in a while. This might be his only motivation to go home. On the way home, Smith happily chatted with his pet eagle. He casually saw Ada enter a nightclub. Smith thought of Ada's beauty. He felt a rush of attraction after years of not being with a woman. He followed Ada into the nightclub. Smith was preparing to conquer her, but Ada completely ignored the jerk. She thought Smith should be single for life. As soon as she said that, another man approached to chat her up, but Ada completely ignored the man. The man was refused and extremely angry. He was about to take aggressive action when Ada knocked him to the ground. Then Ada left the scene gracefully. Seeing this, Smith was completely stunned. He was glad he hadn't approached her earlier, but there was no doubt he was destined to spend a lonely night. Just as he was about to leave, Smith suddenly spotted a new target. The two had a great time chatting. Then the woman actually brought Smith home directly. Smith was very pleased. It had been a long time since he had tasted a woman's company. As their relationship grew closer, they exchanged more intimate moments, but just after it was over, the woman suddenly pulled out a knife. Smith quickly dodged. After all, any misstep could lead to him getting stabbed. At this moment, Smith asked the woman what she wanted, but the woman didn't waste time talking, and continued to attack. Due to the woman's fierce assault, Smith jumped out the window to escape. The woman clearly had no intention of letting him go easily. She aggressively chased after him. When the woman spotted Smith, she lunged at him fiercely. Fortunately, Smith reacted quickly. He hurriedly grabbed a helmet from his car and put it on. In the next moment, the helmet's power was indeed formidable. It blew the ground to pieces. The car was immediately totaled. Because the commotion was so great, nearby police rushed to check the situation. Seeing that things were not looking good, Smith successfully slipped away before the police arrived. Then Smith called Ada. He stated that the situation was critical, and a butterfly had attacked him. He almost got killed. Ada urged him to escape quickly. He must not get caught by the police. She and Helen would be there soon. At this moment, Smith had already returned to the woman's house. After hurriedly getting dressed, Smith began to rummage through the place. Soon, he had packed up the things that interested him. Smith also grabbed a peculiar item. At this moment, Ada yelled at this idiot, asking why he hadn't come out yet. How much longer did he expect them to wait? Smith heard that Ada was coming to back him up. He leaned out the window to check the situation. Smith did see her, but the police also spotted him. Smith realized that things were going terribly wrong. He immediately took off running. The police rushed in to apprehend him. Seeing that he had nowhere to run, Smith had to knock on a nearby door. When the door opened, he immediately tied up the couple inside. Then he tried to sneak out through the back window, but this was the 5th floor. He leaped down to the 4th floor, but Smith fell down. Then he used the same method to reach the 2nd floor. Ironically, the support sent by the police arrived here, and they happened to see Smith running away. At this moment, Smith was so scared that he couldn't move. In a critical moment, Ada shot a few arrows, taking down the police. Watching handsome Ada appear, Smith was captivated, but escaping was still the priority. He decided to impress Ada with a stylish leap. Without a doubt, he crashed into a trash can. Smith couldn't care less about looking cool anymore, and had to hurry and escape. At this moment, a female police officer upstairs spotted Smith fleeing. She fired several shots at him, but Smith was agile in his movements. He cleverly dodged all the bullets. Then he whistled and drove away with the eagle in his car. In the end, the police didn't catch up to him. Meanwhile, to prevent the leakage of team members' information, David instructed Kevin to erase Smith's driving records, but Kevin played a trick. Because he particularly disliked Smith's father, Kevin simply changed the driving record to that of Smith's father. The next day, the police quickly showed up at the door. They asked the old man where he had been yesterday, but the father spat in response. Then he shut the door. Upon hearing this, David praised Kevin for his good work. Then they sent Helen to the apartment from last night. After finding the couple tied up by Smith, they bribed them to alter their testimonies. With the couple's identification, the police directly arrested the father. The old man next door was very pleased to see this. He shouted that such bad people should be locked up for reform. Afterward, the father was taken into a cell. Since he was a regular there, everyone fell silent as soon as he entered. At this moment, the father approached a young man.
That's my spot between 5 and 7 during winter.
The young man thought the old man was just losing his mind with age, so he didn't take him seriously at all. In the next moment, the young man felt a wave of hostility around him. All the inmates were staring at him. The young man then realized that he couldn't afford to mess with this old man, so he quickly stood up and apologized. Then he hurriedly left. At this point, the father sat down. All the inmates began to kneel before him. It seemed that the father's status was not simple. On the other side, a family of 4 was happily chatting, but suddenly, everyone became serious and silent. Then, the woman began preparing dinner for her family. Before long, she brought all the food to the table. When they saw the food, they actually extended a tongue that was 2.5 meters long. Upon closer inspection, it resembled the mouthparts of insects used for feeding. It turned out that they were all butterflies, which were the latest targets of the Suicide Squad's mission. At this moment, Smith and the others had been waiting outside for a long time. As the timing became ripe, David ordered Smith to shoot the target directly, but when Smith saw that the target was a child, he couldn't bring himself to do it. The other members of the squad noticed his hesitation. At this time, teammate Dean told Smith to get out of the way. Then he fired several shots. Dean killed all 3 of the targets. Just as he was about to fire the last shot, suddenly a flying kick hit him and sent him flying. Smith and Ada were caught off guard as well, and they took a few punches too. This little green figure was likely a bodyguard of the Butterfly organization. Hearing the gunfire, he quickly arrived to deal with the enemies. His legs were quite powerful. Even Ada, who had exceptional combat skills, couldn't defeat him. Then, the little green figure kicked Ada again, sending her flying. Ada rolled down the slope and couldn't stop at all. Finally, she crashed into a rock and fell unconscious. On the other side, the little green figure was solving the remaining people. His strength was truly terrifying. Smith and Dean had to team up, but they still weren't a match for the little green figure. At this moment, Smith took out his ultimate skill. Unexpectedly, Dean countered him on the spot. David saw the predicament they were in, so he quickly called Helen for help. At this point, Smith had been beaten down and couldn't get up. Dean was also captured immediately. Then, the two were taken by the little green figure to a basement. There, they saw a man parasitized by butterflies. The man claimed he was an expert in interrogation and coercion. He believed they must be a loving family. To prevent his teammates from suffering, they would surely reveal everything they knew. Then, the man began to torture Dean. He warned Smith that if he didn't speak, things would get harder, but Smith didn't care about Dean's fate at all. He remained completely unperturbed throughout. On the other side, David and the others had already arrived. They found Ada had regained consciousness. Then the three searched for their missing teammates using the locator. While searching around, Helen accidentally triggered a mechanism. Suddenly, a door opened in the wall. A green protective wall appeared before them. Ada quickly checked the locator, and found that Dean and Smith were just behind the wall. At this moment, David took out his latest treasure. It was a card-style bomb. He stuck the bomb onto the protective wall. After retreating to a safe position, David pressed the switch. Embarrassingly, the bomb didn't explode at all. David hurriedly went forward to check the situation. The moment he got close, seeing the rescue arrive, Smith quickly untied the rope and joined the battle. At this point, without the little green figure's protection, the man was killed on the spot. Afterward, after defeating the enemies, Smith remembered Dean. While he was untying him, a butterfly crawled out of the man's mouth and flew away. So the butterfly plan was really orchestrated by butterflies. These butterflies could parasitize human brains, thereby controlling them. After the crisis was averted, Smith returned to his father's house to scavenge again. Just as he was feeling happy, he casually noticed his father's latest invention, a set of white dragon armor. As Smith was about to examine it closely, Dean suddenly appeared behind him. He mocked that the mech looked very cheap, but it suited a waist like Smith perfectly. Smith was ready to teach this brat a lesson. The two playfully left their father's house. At this time, the old man next door saw Smith return. He directly mocked, saying Smith didn't look like a good person at all. He would eventually end up in prison with his villainous father. Upon hearing this, Smith suddenly realized. Then, he called David to inquire about the situation. When Smith learned that the organization had put his father in jail, he shouted angrily, "Why are you messing with my father?" Immediately afterward, Smith shared his heartfelt truth with Dean. He had always longed for a father's love. Although he had been beaten by his father since childhood, Smith still hoped to earn his father's approval one day. He decided to go to prison to check on his father's condition. Meanwhile, David learned that Smith was going to the prison. Considering the bigger picture, David quickly informed Helen to stop Smith. Helen received orders to rush to the prison. Fortunately, Smith had not yet entered the prison. Helen quickly stopped him. To prevent Smith from seeing his father, Helen hurriedly shared his childhood sorrows with him. After she finished telling everything, Smith was very saddened, but he still wanted to visit his father. Then Smith met his father. He explained that he had no knowledge of the situation, but his father wouldn't listen to anything. He believed Smith was an ungrateful son. Then the two began to argue again. At this moment, the father made a harsh statement, saying he would definitely inform the police about the organization's good deeds. Seeing that reasoning was futile, Smith had to leave. Meanwhile, Helen, waiting outside, met Dean. She told Dean that Smith's father was his emotional burden. As long as he was alive, Smith would never be able to escape the shadow. Dean instantly came up with a plan. Then, Smith followed Helen to the organization. As they were about to arrive, Kevin called to report that something had happened. The little green figure he had previously captured had escaped. Just now, the unconscious little green figure woke up. He used his shrinking technique to break free from his restraints. He kicked Kevin down directly. Then he jumped out of the window and escaped. Smith quickly inquired about the situation. Based on Kevin's description, Smith quickly pursued him. Fortunately, the little green figure was seriously injured and couldn't run far. Before long, Smith caught up with the little green figure. The two faced off and started fighting immediately. This time, the little green figure had no chance to fight back. Before long, he was subdued by Smith. At this point, the little green figure begged Smith to let him go, because the butterflies were not truly vicious. But Helen didn't give him another chance to speak. She shot him directly, knocking him to the ground. On the other side, to help Smith escape his shadow, Dean began to execute his plan. He arrived at the police station. Dean picked up a trash can and smashed it against the police station's glass. Then Dean was promptly arrested as he had hoped. He successfully got himself imprisoned for disturbing the peace. His only purpose for this trip was to kill his father, White Dragon. Creating chaos was his specialty. When Dean saw White Dragon, he just said a bunch of trash talk directly. White Dragon's lackeys quickly surrounded him. They wanted to teach this guy a lesson, but these hooligans weren't enough for Dean to warm up. The police quickly discovered that a crowd was fighting. They hurried in to break them up. At this moment, the father realized he seemed to have seen Dean before. He understood everything, and shouted that his son was going to kill him. He wanted to provide a new lead. Meanwhile, Helen found a mysterious business card on the table. She quickly informed David about it. Then David immediately gathered everyone for a meeting. Based on the business card, he located a warehouse that stored food for the butterflies. David also found relevant information about the butterflies. Through an animated presentation, Kevin demonstrated the butterflies' parasitic method to them. They enter the human body through the mouth and the anus. Moreover, once the butterflies parasitize humans, humans become incredibly strong. Soon Kevin's demonstration came to an end. Smith was resentful because of what Dean had done to his father. He seized the opportunity to mock Kevin's animation as poor. Then the two began a heated argument. David quickly intervened to stop them. Afterward, the Suicide Squad headed to the warehouse to investigate. Soon, the four arrived at the warehouse entrance. According to the instructions, they were to split into two teams. Since Dean was being obtuse, Helen and Ada both wanted to team up with Smith. Through rock, paper, scissors, Helen successfully got the peacekeeper role. Ada complained that the next part would definitely be boring. Immediately afterward, the group began to take action. As the peacekeeper entered the warehouse, he swiftly killed several people. This was because his helmet had X-ray vision. He could see whether there were butterflies inside human brains. It seemed that the father was indeed formidable. On the other side, Ada and Dean found a special warehouse. It was filled with boxes full of butterfly food. This was very likely the butterfly's lair. The two prepared to continue their investigation. At this moment, someone spotted the two of them. He shouted loudly that there were intruders. Immediately after, all the employees rushed at them like rabid dogs. Ada and Dean quickly raised their guns to shoot, but the enemy was simply too numerous. The two had to find a place to hide. Fortunately, they found a room they could lock. For now, the two were safe. Then, Ada told Helen they were trapped and now needed support. On the other side, the peacekeeper was increasingly on a killing spree. He heard Helen say that Ada needed help. The peacekeeper quickly cleared the obstacles in front of him. Then he arrived at the room where Ada was hiding. But there were too many people parasitized at the entrance. It looked like they were about to break the door down. The peacekeeper prepared to try out the weapon he had developed. The principle of the weapon was quite simple. It was a bomb attached to a missile. Fortunately, its power was not to be underestimated. With a loud bang, the parasitized individuals were all blown to pieces. However, the peacekeeper underestimated the bomb's power. He and Helen were also blown away by the shockwave of the explosion. The noise from the explosion was too loud. Kevin, waiting outside for backup, was very worried about the group. He hurriedly called out to the squad members, but there was not a single reply. At this moment, Helen and Smith quickly ran into the room. They wanted to check if Ada and Dean were still alive. Suddenly, Smith spotted a gorilla that had been parasitized by butterflies. He rushed in, trying to deal with the problem first, but the gorilla's strength was overwhelming. Smith was knocked down and couldn't get up. Ada saw the scene and quickly helped. The gorilla picked up a box nearby and threw it at Ada. Ada was also struck and couldn't move. As it was about to kill the two, Helen and Dean arrived just in time. The two had clear roles. One fired to draw attention, while the other engaged in close combat. But after just a few rounds, Dean was knocked down to the ground. In a critical moment, Kevin used a chainsaw to slice into the gorilla's back. Dean quickly praised him for being clever. The crisis was successfully resolved. The group happily returned. Ada records a beautiful life with a camera. At this moment, she felt that Smith wasn't so annoying after all. In fact, he was quite interesting. Immediately afterward, she pulled Smith into their small group. This meant that everyone acknowledged him as a member of the team. In the evening, Helen suggested taking Smith home. Smith invited her to try his cooking. It was obvious that it tasted terrible. At this moment, Helen seized the opportunity, hiding Smith's peace diary under the cabinet. Then, Helen returned to the organization. At this time, David was still busy organizing documents. As Helen casually glanced over, she saw Smith's helmet. Thinking the helmet had X-ray vision, she wanted to put it on to see if it was fun. When Helen looked through the helmet, she was startled. David had actually been parasitized by a butterfly too. She screamed in fright and ran outside, but David chased after her. Helen wanted to pull out her gun to shoot David, but she was knocked down by his punch. Thinking she was doomed, she was surprised when David said he wouldn't hurt her. At this moment, Ada rushed in and picked up the handgun from the floor. Then she handed the gun back to Helen. Ada seemed to have known about David's parasitism all along. Then the group returned to the organization. Ada explained what had happened. It turned out that The butterfly in David's brain was different. It had always opposed its kind from harming humans. To stop them, it had chosen to parasitize David. In fact, it didn't want to do this either, but it had no other choice. Now, it must stop the butterflies at their source. As long as the cows are killed, the food supply for the butterflies can be cut off. They won't be able to continue reproducing. Meanwhile, White Dragon reported that his son had committed a crime. Then he provided the police with detailed leads. Since his son wanted to kill him, he didn't have to hold back. He revealed everything Smith had done. The police verified the information and released White Dragon. Now free, White Dragon only wanted to do one thing: to kill that ungrateful son. Then, he gathered his lackeys and suited them up in White Dragon armor. Everything was ready. Next would be the time for the hunt. On the other side, based on the leads provided by White Dragon, the police decided to capture Smith. It was said that Smith had a group of accomplices, so they mobilized many fully armed officers. They were bound to arrest Smith and all his accomplices. Fortunately, David had an informant planted in the police station. He promptly passed the news to David. At this time, Smith was chatting with Dean. He casually noticed the butterfly they had captured last time was painting. Smith picked it up and found it was a peace symbol. He realized this butterfly was not ordinary, so Smith thought of a way to try to communicate with the butterfly. He told the butterfly to nod if yes, and not to move if no. But Dean laughed upon hearing this. He mocked Smith, wondering if he hadn't been with a woman for too long. So he thought the butterfly looked good, and he fantasized about chatting with the butterfly. The two resumed their usual banter. This led them to miss the call from David. Due to not being able to reach Smith, David called Dean instead. By the time the two learned of the news, the police were almost at the door. Smith quickly threw the eagle out the skylight. Then he and Dean climbed up to the roof. In the next moment, the police burst through the door, but there was no one inside. By observation, the female officer concluded that Smith couldn't have gone far. She immediately ordered everyone to go after Smith. At this moment, Smith and Dean were hiding in a tree. He saw his eagle running around chaotically. Smith was afraid of being exposed. He called for it to come back quickly, but his voice was too soft and the eagle couldn't hear him. With no other choice, he whistled. The eagle heard the whistle. But the female officer also noticed something unusual. She quickly followed the sound to the base of the tree. Seeing her alone, Dean prepared to kill her with a knife. Smith urged him to put the knife away. He said they couldn't just kill good people indiscriminately. Dean was shocked to see this former prison regular, as Smith had surprisingly changed his ways. Then, to avoid being discovered by the female officer, the two prepared to move to the nearby tree. At this moment, Dean lost his balance and fell down. The bottle he carried shattered upon impact. The butterfly inside took the opportunity to escape. Seeing the female officer, it flew into her mouth. The female officer lay on the ground, struggling and resisting, but it was all in vain. The butterfly successfully completed its parasitism. Smith and Dean were completely stunned by this scene. Suddenly, several more police officers arrived from behind. They didn't have time to think too much. Smith and Dean began to flee wildly. At this moment, the eagle had finally had enough fun. Seeing its master being bullied, it dove down and knocked all the police officers over. Thinking they had escaped, a police officer suddenly aimed his gun at Smith. But in the next moment, the officer was shot in the head. At this time, the informant from the police station stepped out. He urged the two to escape quickly, leaving the rest to him to handle. Smith was curious to see how undercover agents handled police. To his surprise, the informant aimed and fired at the injured officer on the ground. Seeing this, Smith began to have doubts about whether they were truly the villains. On the other side, the female officer who had been parasitized by the butterfly woke up. She hurried to chase after Smith and Dean, but found nothing. At this moment, an officer was searching Smith's house. He found the peace diary that Helen had hidden. Fortunately, the informant arrived just in time. He took the diary away. At this time, Smith and Dean had already escaped back to the organization, and informed their teammates about the butterfly parasitism police. Smith angrily walked up to David. He questioned the informant about his cruelty. How could he not spare even the injured officer? Smith wanted to say more, but suddenly Kevin told Smith to be quiet, because he had already found the cows. Except for Smith and Dean, the others clearly knew the details of the plan. Only the two of them were left out of the conversation. Smith felt like an outsider. He was particularly angry. The scene shifted. The female officer had returned to the police station. She hadn't even wiped the blood from her mouth. The female officer started drawing on the computer. She seemed to be conveying some kind of message. Other officers noticed her unusual behavior, and came to ask what was happening, but the female officer simply walked away. In the evening, The female officer sat on a patch of grass. She seemed to be waiting for something. Suddenly, many twinkling lights appeared ahead. The female officer stood up excitedly. Countless spaceships descended before her. In the next moment, many butterflies emerged from the spaceships. The female officer was very happy to see her companions. Immediately afterward, all the butterflies obediently followed her. The female officer was ready to lead them to do something significant. Soon, the butterflies attacked the entire police station. Whether they were police officers or criminals, they were all brutally parasitized by the butterflies. In an instant, everyone fell to the ground, convulsing. Immediately after, they all got up and followed the instructions of the female police officer, heading towards one place. On the other side, Ada knew that Smith was angry about the cows. She was preparing to do something to apologize. So Ada drew a peace dove on a machine gun. Just then, Smith happened to walk by. Ada immediately handed the gun to him. Seeing the peace dove, he quickly called out to Ada. Smith expressed that he was tired of living dangerously, and he couldn't bear to see innocent people lose their lives. Ada realized that Smith was different from before. Then, she said a few comforting words and left. At this moment, Smith saw the piano nearby. He played a piano piece he had learned in childhood. Memories came flooding back. Suddenly, Dean called Smith over to watch the television. The news content was particularly shocking. The parasitized police officers exposed the peace diary. They claimed that the peacekeeper was a villain. The police would surely do everything to apprehend him. Smith was completely stunned after watching the news. The next day, the suicide squad on a mission was ambushed. It turned out that White Dragon had found Smith. Before they could understand the situation, White Dragon directly ripped open the cabin with his bare hands. Smith recognized his father in the armored suit, but before he could say anything, Smith was silenced by White Dragon's cannon. He was just about to ask his father what happened, but unexpectedly, White Dragon didn't give them a chance to speak at all. He was about to kill his son with a single shot. Dean quickly opened fire on White Dragon. The firepower was overwhelming. White Dragon was forced out of the cabin. Then, Dean continued to suppress the enemy with fire. White Dragon was beaten and unable to resist. At this moment, a lackey threw a bomb. After a loud explosion, the father in the armor only sustained minor injuries, but Dean was caught in the blast. Smith wanted to go check on him, but Kevin stopped him just in time. After all, if he goes, he would die. Then the two hurried into the woods. At this time, White Dragon quickly checked the location. After locating Smith, he immediately began the pursuit. On the other side, Dean hid behind a tree. His injuries were severe. If he didn't get medical attention soon, he would likely die. Dragging his broken body, Dean got into the car of White Dragon's lackey. But just as he drove the car a short distance, Dean fell into unconsciousness due to his serious injuries. The car then drove off into a ditch. Fortunately, Smith and the others who had come here found him. After waking Dean up, Smith drove the car to escape with them. At this moment, Kevin told Dean that he had just overheard a conversation between White Dragon and his lackeys. It turned out that each helmet was equipped with a tracking device. Dean yelled, "We're doomed!" Smith knew Dean very well. He quickly got out of the car and opened the trunk. Sure enough, Dean was the type of person who loved to chase small gains. Even as he was almost blown to pieces, he didn't forget to grab the helmet. Just as Smith was about to throw the helmets away, White Dragon's lackeys had already caught up. Smith was caught off guard. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the eagle came to the rescue. It knocked all the lackeys to the ground. Then it prepared to attack White Dragon, but White Dragon knocked it away with a single punch. Seeing his pet injured, Smith got up from the ground and charged at White Dragon. Then, he questioned White Dragon about his cruelty, but White Dragon didn't want to hear his nonsense. He aimed his cannon directly at Smith. Then he stomped on him. After venting his anger, White Dragon prepared to kill Smith. Suddenly, Dean climbed onto White Dragon's back. He sabotaged the power source of White Dragon's armor. Dean mocked White Dragon, saying his armor was too ugly. At this moment, Kevin picked up a machine gun. He aimed and opened fire on White Dragon's lackeys. White Dragon watched as all his lackeys were dead. He decided to quickly finish the task at hand. He prepared to fire and kill Smith, but due to the damaged power source, he was unable to launch successfully. Smith seized the opportunity to get up from the ground. He tackled White Dragon to the ground. Smith vented years of pent-up resentment. White Dragon was pinned down and rubbed against the ground. Then, after releasing his anger, Smith shot and killed his father. He sat on the ground, crying in pain. Smith could finally come out of the shadow of childhood. Meanwhile, the female officer had already found David's location. However, David had anticipated that they would come. He calmly notified Ada and Helen to run. He had to kill the cows to stop them. Just as he finished speaking, the female officer burst in with her team. David fired wildly, but soon he was pinned to the ground. David shouted that the butterfly plan would definitely fail. Upon hearing this, the female officer immediately fired her weapon. At this moment, the butterfly crawled out of David's mouth. It was about to parasitize someone else, but it was caught by the female officer. She squeezed it hard, killing it completely. The female officer angrily threw the traitor to the ground. She turned around and led her team away from the scene. Once everyone had left, Ada and the others hiding in the corner went to check the situation. It was a scene of devastation everywhere. David was already dead. At this moment, Ada picked up the butterfly from the ground, but it moved slightly and died completely. She didn't have time to grieve. The butterfly's new bodyguard arrived to finish the job. He happened to spot Ada and the others. He didn't care about women at all. He knocked Ada down with a few punches. Fortunately, Helen took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. She used a stun baton to kill the bodyguard. Afterward, Ada and Helen discussed how to kill the cows. Suddenly, they received a call from Kevin. Kevin said they were in trouble now. Just when they took the eagle to the pet hospital for emergency care, the doctor saw Smith and Dean's faces. Their bounty was quite high. The doctor would definitely report them. So Dean planned to kill the doctor after saving the eagle. Fortunately, Ada arrived just in time. After some persuasion, Dean finally put down the gun. On the other side, Smith had been praying for the eagle on the hospital bed. In the next moment, a miracle truly happened. The eagle spread its wings and embraced Smith. Smith was overjoyed. He quickly took out his camera to capture the moment. Outside the window, Helen saw this heartwarming scene. She gained a new understanding of Smith. Then the entire suicide squad gathered. But Captain David was already deceased. Now they needed to elect a new leader. Everyone chose Ada. Immediately after, Ada shared her plan with everyone, because the butterflies could only consume the milk from cows. So if they want to stop the butterfly, they have to kill the cow. Therefore, they would proceed with their plan to destroy the target. Soon, the group headed to the dairy farm based on the location. Meanwhile, the female officer had arrived in front of the cows. The giant creature before her was the cow. It was the only food source for the alien butterflies. Thus, the female officer deployed heavy troops to protect the cow's safety. The scene shifted. The suicide squad had arrived at the location. According to Ada's plan, Smith secretly killed a guard. Next, they would find someone to put on the guard's uniform. Then, they would take explosives to find the cow. After a successful escape, they would press the switch to blow up the cow. Because only Kevin had not shown his face in front of the police, this task could only be assigned to him. Then, Kevin changed his clothes and successfully infiltrated the dairy factory. Based on the information he had found, he went to the basement and encountered the cow. Kevin was completely stunned. He dropped the bomb and hurriedly ran outside. At this moment, the guards outside noticed something was wrong with Kevin. They called him over to ask questions, but Kevin couldn't say anything. On the other side, someone discovered the bomb. They quickly reported the matter to the female officer. Seeing that things had been exposed, Kevin tried to escape. At this time, Smith told Helen to detonate the bomb quickly, but at the crucial moment, the remote control fell to the ground. At this point, Kevin had been pinned to the ground. In this critical moment, Helen pressed the switch just in time. A loud explosion attracted the attention of all the guards. They all rushed to protect the cow. Then, Helen detonated the remaining bombs. Now all the bombs had been detonated. Smith and the others arrived to finish the job. They engaged in a fierce confrontation with the guards. At this moment, Ada instructed Smith to check if the cow was dead. She left the situation to them to handle. Smith received the order and went to the basement. As soon as he got down, he encountered a familiar face. The female officer had been waiting here for a long time. The two faced each other and immediately started fighting. Without the help of the helmet, Smith couldn't overpower her at all. On the other side, due to the overwhelming number of guards, Dean and Ada were seriously injured. Then, Ada couldn't hold on and fell down. In the final moment before the butterfly parasitized her, Helen arrived just in time to help. Helen successfully intervened and decided to go support Smith. As soon as she arrived in the basement, she saw Smith being forced to retreat. Helen hurriedly controlled the helmet to charge at the enemy. However, she hadn't learned to control the helmet, and crashed directly into the wall. The female officer could have killed Smith right away, but she thought of a more entertaining idea. That was to recruit Smith to their side. Next, she brought Smith in front of the cow, hoping he could help the butterflies transport the cow elsewhere. Since the female officer had read the peace diary, so she tried to impress Smith emotionally. After some persuasion, Smith recalled his traumatic childhood experiences. The female officer thought she had succeeded, but what she didn't know was that Smith had already killed his father. After Smith killed the female officer, he shot the cow dead as well. They finally succeeded in completing their mission. Then the entire Suicide Squad evacuated. At this moment, the Justice League made a cool entrance. They said they were reinforcements sent by Amanda. However, it seemed they had arrived a bit late.
You're late, you fucking dickheads! Go fuck another fish, asshole!
The film comes to an end here. People are used to the setting where superheroes have special powers. When they see these heroes without superpowers, they find them more relatable. This setting is still very appealing. As a spin-off of the X-Team, many people don't understand why the Suicide Squad has so many powerful characters, but the director chose to focus on an ordinary peacekeeper. In fact, the more ordinary it is, the greater the contrast. Who would have thought that such an ordinary hero could save the world? The overall style of the show is quite humorous. Zhao Zena is very suitable for playing such humorous roles. The Justice League's cameo appearances are very nonsensical. It feels almost the same whether they are included or not, but it still gives a bit of a surprise. Although the show has many logical flaws, and the plot is not very rich, it doesn't detract from the fact that it's a good show. If you like my channel, please click subscribe.